because, we have election coming up later this year. So it's so funny, sometimes when you haven't heard anything about a particular issue and then within a couple of days, 2-3 different people engage you on the same issue. So it was just about a week or two ago that somebody reached out to me, about exactly when would the election be due according to the Constitution. And, saying that when we say, as we kind of loosely say, election constitutionally due by September, that's not correct according to the text of the Constitution. So I turned on and I was listening to the Constitutional Amendment Committee, the Joint Select Committee looking at the Constitution Amendment Bill, and opening up the committee meeting, the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, Malahoo Forte, raised that very issue. So I said, let me play for you what she said, and then we can talk about it a little bit.
I hear it often said that the elections are due by September. That is not constitutionally correct. What the Constitution provides for is an outer life for the date of Parliament, and that is 5 years, and the life of the Parliament commences on the first sitting of the Parliament after general elections, not when the general elections are held, because we know that the electoral laws require formalities to be complied with about counting, and sometimes space has to be given for recounts, judicial recounts. So it's important for all Jamaicans to understand that the life of the Parliament is not fixed, because we do not have fixed date elections, but the outer life of the Parliament is 5 years. And if elections are not called sooner, the Parliament automatically dissolves on the 5th anniversary after its first sitting. And then the Constitution also provides for the holding of elections within 3 months of the Parliament being dissolved. And that is set out at section 64 of the Constitution. Section 64(1) says that the Governor General may at any time, by proclamation published in the Gazette, prorogue or dissolve Parliament. Subsection 2 provides that subject to the provisions of subsection 3 of this section, Parliament, unless sooner dissolved, shall continue for 5 years from the date of its first sitting after any dissolution, and shall then stand dissolved. Subsection 3, at any time when Jamaica is at war, Parliament may from time to time extend the period of 5 years specified in subsection 2 of this section, but not more than 12 months at a time, provided that the life of Parliament shall not be extended under this subsection for more than 2 years. Subsection 4 says, if between a dissolution of Parliament and the next ensuing general election of members of the House of Representatives, an emergency arises of such a nature that in the opinion of the Prime Minister it is necessary for the two houses or either of them to be summoned before that a general election can be held, the Governor General may, by proclamation published in the Gazette, summon the two houses of the preceding Parliament, and that Parliament shall thereupon be deemed, except for the purposes of section 65, not to have been dissolved, but shall be deemed, except, as said, to be dissolved on the date on which the polls are held in the next ensuing elections. And it indicates that in the exercise of his powers under this section, the Governor General shall act in accordance with the advice to the Prime Minister, provided that if the House of Representatives, by a resolution which has received the affirmative vote of a majority of all the members thereof, has resolved that it has no confidence in the government, the Governor General shall, by proclamation published in the Gazette, dissolve Parliament. So it provides for the dissolution of Parliament where there is a no confidence vote. And elections have to be held within 3 months after the Parliament is dissolved.
Okay, I know that sounded like a whole lot of legalese, right? So I want to bring everybody in studio say yes, I don't know what that means. All right, I'm going to break it down for you, but we're right at 6, all right? So let's just take a break.
December. The minister made the comments during yesterday's sitting of the Joint Select Committee reviewing the constitutional reform bill. Many Jamaicans are expecting to go to the polls by September, but according to Minister Malahoo Forte, the election could be called later.
I hear it often said that the elections are due by September. That is not constitutionally correct. What the Constitution provides for is an outer life for the date of Parliament, and that is 5 years, and the life of the Parliament commences on the first sitting of the Parliament after general elections, not when the general elections are held, because we know that the electoral laws require formalities to be complied with about counting, and sometimes space has to be given for recounts, judicial recounts. So it's important for all Jamaicans to understand that life of the Parliament is not fixed, because we do not have fixed date elections, but the outer life of the Parliament is 5 years. And if elections are not called sooner, the Parliament automatically dissolves on the 5th anniversary after its first sitting. And then the Constitution also provides for the holding of elections within 3 months of the Parliament being dissolved.
Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs Malahoo Forte. But in a statement today, PNP General Secretary Dr. Dayton Cambell said the comments by Minister Malahoo Forte appear designed to inject uncertainty and confusion. He says the comments reek of desperation and seemed intended to test the patience of the electorate. He called for Prime Minister Dr. Andrew Holness to clarify the statement.
Both political parties are already in campaign mode, and the people rightly expect an election by September 2025. If the minister's statement was merely an attempt to test public reaction or distract from the mounting failures of governance, let it be known the PNP will not be distracted, nor will we back down from our duty to stand with the people. I am therefore calling on the Prime Minister to urgently clarify the purpose of the minister's comments and to reassure the nation that there will be no attempt to delay the election or interfere with the constitutional timeline.
PNP General Secretary Dr. Dayton Cambell. Chief Executive Officer of the Seprod Group, Richard Pandohi, says local
Beyond Chancellor. So still to come in the program, today is Yadi, a broad interview, and we're going to be talking to, we're into track and field season, so we thought it was a nice time to talk to Yadi abroad, who is involved in track and field. We're going to be talking to Mark Elliott, Jamaican, former distance runner. He is now the director of track and field at Clemson University in South Carolina in the United States. He's been coaching now in the States for about 30 years or so. He also coaches Olympian Natoya Gould Topping, so make sure you listen out for that. Before that though, so let me go back to this issue of the date of the election. I had played for you a clip from the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, who had been explaining at yesterday's meeting of the Joint Select Committee dealing with the Constitution Amendment Bill what's the situation in relation to when elections in Jamaica are due. And I said I'd break it down for you. So let me start with this. We generally say pretty loosely that our elections are constitutionally due every 5 years. I'm still going to say that that's generally correct, all right? The difficulty we get into is when we start to say when the election is due. So, for instance, we've been saying, again, pretty generally, that elections are constitutionally due by September. That was what the minister was responding to. No, the election, our last election was September 3rd, 2020. Now, if it were that elections are constitutionally due based on the election date, then the election would be due by September 2nd, 2025. But that's not when it is, and that's not what the Constitution says. So what the Constitution says is that the life of Parliament, the outer life of Parliament, in other words, the longest that a Jamaican Parliament can exist is 5 years. All right? So anytime within those 5 years, as you know, the Prime Minister can call an election. But the 5 years doesn't date from the election. It dates from the first sitting of Parliament after the election. So the first sitting of the new Parliament. All right. In our case, I believe that was September 15, 2020. That's when people were sworn in, and you had, the new Parliament coming together for the first time. So Parliament then has up to, it would be, I think, September 14, 2020, if my dates are right. So the Prime Minister has 5 years from the first sitting of Parliament to call the election. If the election is not called by then, the Parliament dissolves automatically. All right? So nothing has to be done. Nobody has to do anything. According to the Constitution, if the full 5 years has gone from the first sitting of Parliament, Parliament is then automatically dissolved. No, there is a provision which honestly I'm not paying much attention to right now, and I'm not even really talking about, which is that if Jamaica is at war, Parliament can extend the period beyond the 5 years. Clearly, we're not at war, so let's just note that and move on, all right? So after Parliament is dissolved, then a general election is to be held within 3 months. So you see where we're going here. So the Parliament has a full term life of 5 years. If the election still hasn't been held, it's automatically dissolved, and then there is a 3-month period within which an election has to be held. So if we are going to the absolute max, and what I understood the minister to have been doing is to explain this is what can happen under the Constitution. So we can go the full 5 years, Parliament is dissolved, and then there's a 3-month window within which the election has to be held. So if you're looking at then mid-September, right, from the first sitting of Parliament, and then you add the 3 months, then that brings us to mid-December. So the outer limit, the absolute outer limit, then you would be talking about mid-December 2025. So I hear people talking about next year and all kinds of things, and no. So I would say two things. Well, first of all, let's hear what the General Secretary of the People's National Party, Dr. Dayton Cambell, said in response.
It reeks of desperation and appears to test the patience of a people who are already demanding meaningful change. The Jamaican people expect to go to the polls by September 2025 to elect a new government. That expectation is not merely political, it is constitutional. It must not be frustrated. The public is already engaged, with nearly 42% of Jamaicans saying they definitely intend to vote, and another 11% saying they are quite likely to vote when elections are called. The PNP reiterates that under Jamaica's constitution, if the Prime Minister does not advise the Governor General to dissolve Parliament, it will do so automatically upon the completion of its term. Once Parliament is dissolved, a general election must be held within 3 months. Jamaica is not at war, and there are no conditions currently present that would permit a lawful extension or deviation from this timeline. We caution the JLP administration against abusing or misinterpreting any constitutional provisions for which the objective requirements do not exist. It must be noted that while Jamaicans are steadfast and committed to democratic norms, the minister's comments are dangerously provocative and entirely unnecessary. Both political parties are already in campaign mode, and the people rightly expect an election by September 2025. I am therefore calling on the Prime Minister to urgently clarify the purpose of the minister's comments and to reassure the nation that there will be no attempt to delay the election or interfere with the constitutional timeline.
Dr. Dayton Cambell, PNP General Secretary. A listener is asking me if the first sitting of Parliament wasn't the opening on February 2021. No, man. You couldn't have the election in September and Parliament not sit for the next 3 months. No, man. It's usually a couple weeks right after the election. So I said, based on what I'm seeing online, it was September 15. I do stand to be corrected, but it wouldn't be more than a couple days off from that. So I hold no brief for the minister, but listening to her, my understanding was that she was saying the election isn't constitutionally due by September, and she was explaining what the Constitution says. And in relation to the 2-year provision for war, again, the minister likes to explain the law and the Constitution. That's my understanding of what she was doing. In terms of motive, I can't speak to that. I don't know if she's flying a kite. I don't know if she's trying to say to people, hey, we might be going down to the wire, so don't get your knickers in a twist. This is what the Constitution says, and the Constitution does allow this. Sounds to me like a little bit of overreaction there from the PNP. I'm not sure where that is coming from. And it is not unknown in the Caribbean. We have seen on a couple of occasions automatic dissolution of Parliament. It happened in Barbados. I think it's about 10 years ago. It's happened in one of the Eastern Caribbean countries at least. I'll do a little bit more research on that. But the Constitution does provide for it. So the question is the PM going to go absolutely down to the wire, not call the election at all, let Parliament, before the 5-year term, let Parliament dissolve, and then we hear the election date, or will he call the election before? But yeah, I think the opposition was overreacting a little bit. There's no situation in which Jamaica could be said to be at war and therefore needing any kind of extension. As I said, I just understood the minister to be doing what she tends to like to do, which is to say to people, this is what the law says, this is what the Constitution says. All right, feel free to share your comments on that as well. 876-553-5908, 876-553-5908. Give us your first name, give us your general location. So let us go now to today's Yardie Abroad.